Zeesh, welcome to the Nexus, and I really appreciate you taking the time to get on here and have a conversation about all things that you and I find fascinating and wondrous and perplexing and mysterious, because there is a great deal of mystery out there about the things that you and I are both interested in. But before we get into the meat and potatoes and we start looking at all this juicy stuff, tell me a little bit about you, what you're doing, where you're at. I know you've got an accent, so you definitely ain't a gringo from America. Wh- Who are you? Where are you? And what are you doing?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you for carving out some time for me today. I appreciate being here. My accent's Wales, so I'm Wales across the Great Pond. Uh, born and bred. Yeah. Been here. So I'm a father, 22 plus years, got four children. We're on a kind of like hilltop mount. Well, for you guys, it's like a hilltop, but here it's like a mountain. We kind of, during the boogeyman, we've been up and down the mountain. We're kind of like, homesteaders wanting to grow our own food, create a garden, where we can, be resilient and sustainable and all that kind of stuff. We've been like that we don't need anyone to tell us that we should be resilient or any of that stuff. We're just that way, right? We like the green things and we like to grow our own food off the land. And all my children kind of partake. So my youngest is 10, my eldest is 20, 23. They all live at home. We're quite traditional values, family values. And I've got a load of ducks and I've got some bees. So like, I'm really into bees. To be fair, like we're going to get into the technology, but I really would just like to be a homesteader, right? Like on the land with the cows. But I kind of feel like with a lot of the geopolitical events that have happened, especially the boogeyman that happened that everybody knows about because it was a global phenomena, that there was a sort of resistance was created where we had to kind of draw a line in the sand. And that's one of the reasons why I'm actually here. I thought, okay, well, let's just get out of the town and let's get onto a mountain where there's good water. I'd already been on the mountain, but just needed to get back onto a mountain, back out of I went into the town for a small period of time. It was an all right town, but the waters there was a challenge, and I kind of see that as a first principle because I'm also a holistic. I happen to be a holistic lifestyle coach, but I always say that I was a dad first, practicing because I had a really good vet back in the 90s, and he was a kind of like traditional physician vet, but he'd kind of got into acupuncture and he'd got into homeopathy. And in the 90s, I started to see like amazing results with my dogs and my cats. And here in Britain, German Shepherds, their legs often play up and, they have problems in their later life. Well, I'd see German Shepherds coming out of that vets with big smiles on their faces. And I seen results with my dog. And I was like, oh my God, if that stuff can work with my animals, this simple remedies, maybe I should consider doing that myself. And so the rest is kind of history.
Well,
Yeah.
Zeesh, let me stop you right there. Can you talk a little bit about what those therapies and remedies were for the dog?
Yeah, so he was a homeopath. His name was Trevor Adams. He was like a patron of like even the royal family. I remember the one day reading well actually if you go back to King George was like 1 minute, let's just see what's going on in husbandry. So he had this lady called Juliette de Barraclay Levy, who was like a herbalist, and her father had lived in Afghanistan, brought the Afghan hound that we know back to Britain, because I think the empire back then was going all around the world, bringing all these treasures from all over the world, like the Dutch Indies Company and everything, and the king sent her to go and live with the gypsies, and she came back and did this whole book on like animal husbandry. If anyone can find her book or her videos, they're really good. Juliette de Barraclay Levy, and it's all about just the simple things of why the gypsy horses and the dogs didn't get ill and all that kind of stuff. So there's that, so with my vet, he was very grounded as a physician, right? So he was a vet physician, like a standardized vet, But I always say he was a great vet because then what he added to his toolbox was acupuncture and homeopathy. So we had a couple of cats. We were living in a caravan. We were homeless at the time. Well, we weren't homeless. We ended up in a caravan on a piece of land, and our cats were there. And one of my cats, because we were on this hilltop, our cats were going off, and there were a lot of wild farm cats. And one of my cats went off. It got ill. It ended up with quite a serious kind of condition, and I had to take first to the vet which was a fully conventional vet in my local town. And the fully conventional vet in the local town was like, oh my God, we're going to put him down. He has X, Y, Z. We got to put him down. And fortunate for me, my friend's mum was there at the time, and she was like, he's not allowed to do that. And in between that time, because about an hour away was my usual vet, but it was an emergency. So it was an emergency. You do the right thing, don't you? You go and see an emergency medic or whatever. And in this case, it was a vet. And my friend's mum was like, no, you can't do that. So I conversed with my vet in Glastonbury, and I said, Trevor, they want to put down my cat. He said, well, Zish, right, what we've got to accomplish here is, like, what are the blood works doing? I said, this is the diagnosis. He said, okay, let's see what the blood results are. He gave me some ammunition, which I could then give to the conventional vet, who was actually very wired, almost like, just really, really quite hyper, wired. I'm going to put your cat down. So I eventually go and see my cat. I've got a load of tins and some food that he liked at the time. It was like this amazing company called Dean's. They put herbs in with the salmon, and I would feed him that. His name was Durban, and then I took a load of other things in there. And as I walked into the vet, like, my cat was dehydrated. He said, your cat's dehydrated, he's going to die. And my cat was next to a radiator, and the radiator was on. And I said, well, look, the first thing, please, can we turn the radiator off? And he said, and he's not drinking the water. I said, that water is warm. Look, there's a burst washer on that tap. Can we give him some of that cold water, please? So I gave him the water. So essentially, I took control of the situation because, by this time, my cat would have been put down. And then what I did was I said, I'm going to give him some food now. So I opened the tin of his food that I knew he loved, and his ears, because his face was all like, was all weeping, and he looked very, very sorry for himself, and his ears went like that since I opened the food. And I was like, there you go. I said, that's it. I said, you do your results at 4:00. I'm coming back for my cat. I'm taking him to my vet tomorrow. That's it. Because as soon as his ears went like this, I was like, my cat's there. He's at home. The lights are on, and somebody is definitely home. So the rest of that's history. I came back in the afternoon. He said, oh yeah, his blood cell count's up. I'm very surprised. I said, that's it. I'm taking him tomorrow. Took him to my vet, and we put him on a course of Nozote. There were some homeopathic remedies. I'll never forget it. It was called Merc Sol, was the key remedy, and it was like a hot sulfurous remedy. And I swear for the life of me, that helped my cat repair and become back to strong health. My other dog, my dog was going through some stuff as well, and he gave her remedies. So for the last 22 plus years, the most important things have been raw meats for my animals. So I would, there was even a point where I was plant-based, and I would go and get the most amazing, like, organic chicken carcasses. I remember one day buying for I had these Dalmatian Staffordshire Lurcher crosses, and I got them a whole half a lamb, organic lamb. It was amazing. I should have eaten it. I was like, look at that. It was so beautiful. My friend Natalie was a shepherdess, and I gave them that. So what I realised there is, and this is with your children, whatever, you always want the best for your animals. You always want the best for your children. And so I've always implemented that, and I've always wanted to make something better. So I'm like, okay, well, if that can work for my dogs, if that can work for my cats, well, maybe I should implement it on myself. And then I became a parent. And then obviously that then transferred onto my children. Oh, okay, how can I make the clothes better? How can I make the bedding better? How can I make education better? So it just seems like a logical thing to do. Like, you just want to do things better, don't you?
Well, yeah, and I mean, there was a lot of interesting things in there. One of the points that came to me was the fact that it sounds like the vet, and this is something I learned back when I started. When I became a shiatsu practitioner back in the 80s.
Mm.
And in order to do that, shiatsu, for those who don't know, is acupressure. It's the same meridians and points, sans needles. Needles and me are not friends, so I was happy to find something that didn't involve needles. But
Yes.
in that study, I had to learn herbology, traditional Chinese medicine, kinesiology, all of the different massage techniques, and even chiropractic. Even though it wasn't officially chiropractic techniques, it's the same things that chiropractors do. And I had scoliosis back in the from an accident in the 80s that in the 90s I corrected with chiropractic and inversion. And all of the traditional doctors, the allopathic guys, are like, well, we can give you some pain for this and some relaxants for that and some anti-inflammatory for this and you know, after a while we just have to keep an eye on it. You'll probably need surgery. And I'm going, your whole approach is completely sans anything that makes any sense, let alone the historical things that have been proven for millennia to work. And so I wanted to, that was one of the points that came up in my mind when you were sharing that experience. But the other thing, too, I think the most important thing is what you're talking about is a holistic approach to your environment, to the way that you are living, to how you are integrating and navigating with the reality that you inhabit. And you have found that as you have explored things, you've found that there's this thing out there, this ether, this energy field, these different ways in which the environment you inhabit actually are animated, and the way that they work and the energy flows through them. And leads me to one of the many reasons I wanted to have this conversation with you is you've been on a path in this open exploration of trying to integrate with your environment and basically be an integrative human, which is essentially what the vets were doing. They were integrative medicine. And this is the thing that I found to be profound in its simplicity, and just blown away at how much of it has been obfuscated and shoved aside and subjugated and everything else. And you look at it and you go, well, what's going on? There seems to be an energetic shift. And you talk about this whole concept of the difference between analog and digital technology as it relates to health and wellness.
Mm.
You're spending a lot of time sorting out the wheat from the chaff, right?
Yes, yeah.
You're looking at what is actually working and what isn't, and then the stuff that isn't, for both that is working and is not working, you're looking at where does it come from? How is this technology, how is this concept emerging, and how is it we are tapping into it? So let's start there. What is the base definition in your mind between the analog versus digital healing frequencies and technologies?
What is the difference, did you say?
Yeah, what's the difference between the analog and the digital type technologies for healing and wellness?
Yes. Okay. So if we just go back to that vet, and you know, and it's actually really good that you had the foundation of the shiatsu and the acupressure and all those kinds of things. So you had that foundation, and I think I should just let people know as well that I had an Afghan grandmother up until age 10, and I think that kind of leaning towards something a little bit more disruptive outside of the box was quite important, because she didn't speak a word of English and I didn't know it at the time, but she was investing the love that a grandmother invests in her grandchild, and she was gifting me her herbal traditional wisdom, like how you've received your traditional Chinese wisdom. So the reason I say that is because for me, I've cracked how best as I can something as that could be near enough indigenous to where I am in Britain when it comes to my food. So I kind of feel like I've got the food right. I kind of feel like I've got the natural medicines right as well. And I'm not saying that as if, I've got it all worked out, but I think I've got quite a good internal compass of where I need to be, what I need to create the greatest food, the greatest medicine. And if I'm not creating it myself right now, at least I know somebody that's doing it the way that I would want it if I was doing it myself. For example, a great steak or some great A2 pasture dairy or some amazing therapeutic grade essential oils. Now, when it comes to the technology, so I'm there then as a father, and I've got 4 children with an incurable challenge that have almost died a few times through misdiagnoses and stuff like that. And I've been through some real challenges with medical technocracy, and it is what it is. And, I kind of embrace it. And so I've got 4 children. My youngest is 10, my eldest 23. And there's no reason for them to have this incurable something. And I always say it's just diagnosis. I always liked the late Wayne Dyer with his I am that I am, and his way. He had a wonderful way with seeing the world. And I remember one day he just gave me this idea. It's just a diagnosis. So we're not victims. My granddad was called Victor, and we keep pushing forward. But I've been there thinking, well, 1 minute, my children have never been, they've never really been afflicted by any sort of medical intervention, because the 4 births were home births, water births, unassisted 3 unassisted births, lotus births before it became trendy, because we wanted each time, as I was saying, you want to be a better parent, you want to have the birth better. And the mother of my children's very elf-like, very Taoist in her way, and she's like, well, women have been having babies for thousands of years. Why do I really need any intervention? So, and from our experience with the so-called, I'd like to put it all under the umbrella of alternative health, because I even see modern allopathic health, and I'm going to answer your question about this difference as kind of alternative as well, because when I look back to, and so there I am, right, thinking, okay, I've got the food right, I've got the medicine right. And then with all this stuff that's going on with the altering of the weather, the altering of the food since World War One, the altering of the technology since World War One, the altering of the medicine since World War One, and everything, and with people with concerns about geoengineering and things like that, and this nanoparticles. And I'm there then thinking, well, okay, I've got the food right, I've got the medicine right, but what about this technology? So then I have people coming to me going, check out this Healy machine, check out this terahertz wand, check out this thing. And in amongst it, then there's a gentleman in Canada, and in 2014 there were a few voices that were going, because people were thinking about this thing called Morgellons from the geoengineering. And there was a guy called Clifford Carnicom and Ilana Freeland that wrote books based on her findings with this so-called cross-domain bacteria at the time. And there were people then realizing, if you look at Dr. Thomas Cowan, that maybe we need to start questioning this virology and, if viruses, does a virus exist? What actually is it? This kind of comes back to my vet as well, because my vet was from around that time of The Foot and Mouth, which was the same bad actors from The Boogeyman. Like you had your Mr. in America, like the wise guy gangster, and we had our Mr. Niall Ferguson in Britain and in the Imperial College London, using Harry Mullis's technology not for what it was created for. And then so they're using all this data modeling, which is quite interesting, and they're trying to reduce us to these diagnoses and fancy names and all this. Everything's become so compartmentalized, and in amongst this, people are thinking, well, I've got Morgellons, but in amongst it, there's a small group of people, and they've never claimed to be whistleblowers or anything like that. They've been in their own little covenant of, like, oh my God, what do we have? Oh, maybe this is something like synthetic biology. You could look at Ilana Freeland's 3 books, and then, like, they are doing experiments with things like your digital spooky device or your TENS machine, even things that have been reputed to be good in the past, like your Holder Clark zappers and stuff. So while I was investigating this technology and I was learning about this thing called an anti-nano bucket at the time, and the Boogie Managers happened, and at that time, actually, there were women that were showing up magnetic around their thyroid region. A lot of women were going like this on social media. My friend Kirsty was like, Zeesh, look at these spoons. And I was like, oh my God. And me and my mate were there going, look, the spoons are magnetic on us. And she commissioned me at the time to make these buckets. And at the time, I was like sick of trying to make a bucket. I was like, oh, what is this bloody bucket? And the man I'm trying to learn from keeps going off about George Carlin and, you know, and male jokes. So I just want to learn how to make the bucket. And in the end, so what happened, I had to decipher what was it that this gentleman was using to disrupt and disengage the synthetic biology, because he was actually starting to peel back the results, and you realized that he wasn't a Lyme's disease, and that actually he was suffering from payloads of nanosynthetic biology and all the other things that kind of come with that. Maybe a lifetime of, you know, eating supermarket food and adulterated food and you know, and supplements and God knows what, right? So, and then your water supply and everything. So when I'm learning what this bucket is, I've known about Tesla, but I'd never really done a deep dive into Tesla's technology. And I'd learned, in the 90s, I knew about Wilhelm Reich and his orgone chamber and Schauberger and Raymond Reif and all these great human beings. And unfortunately, how they slipped on bars of soap and all their patents were stolen and stuff, you know, by mean people and all that kind of stuff. And so as I was doing that research, I had a question. And in amongst that as well, I started to meet engineers that were connected to the original Tesla technology. Now, there's some great human beings out in the west coast of America. I think they're between Washington State, and they needed a place where they could really ground into the earth. And there's an amazing radio engineer called Eric Dollard. And he's been into crystal radio since he was a little boy and collecting old radio valve things, analog radios and stuff. And his young protege, or whatever, you know, his young apprentice is a guy called Aaron Murakami. And they were responsible for bringing Chinese medicine and Qigong to the West in around, I think it must have been that time when they had that so-called sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And maybe it was for a lot of people, but for a lot of people as well, it was about spirituality and the death of the three kings. And, you know, Ilana, for example, was going out to Hawaii and learning macrobiotics and learning Rudolf Steiner. So, you know, for some it was, but I think for others, they were taking their healing journey and their experience quite seriously. You know, I think it did affect a lot of people.
I'll just add that I grew up during that time in the
Yes.
60s and 70s
Yes.
in Southern California.
Yes.
And I didn't leave until the mid 80s.
Yes.
So I can confirm that the sex, drugs, rock and roll, and the spiritual development was in full bloom back then. And we didn't know what it was. We were just exploring and pushing the boundaries, trying to figure out, wait a minute, the man told us that the fences are here, but we can see through the fence and we can see on the other side, and we have people that have been there and they're coming back and they're telling us this incredible stuff. So apparently all the boundaries and the carefully crafted and curated narrative that has been designed to control and keep knowledge from the people,
Yes.
and which becomes understanding, and then eventually, you know, you get some kind of wisdom and enlightenment. But all of that is true. I know, I was there and I can vouch for it. So
Yes.
you are correct.
Yeah. Well, yes. And so here, like, you know, many were going off to Afghanistan. But anyway, my point being is they were bringing in this Chinese technology, you know, like the Qigong and all this kind of stuff. And there were a lot of great humans at that time doing that. They were trying to create these healing devices. And I remember hearing that the Chinese people were like, well, can we even make a Qi machine? And eventually they actually did make something that was validated by these Qigong masters that was something like a Qi machine. So these folks were then starting to educate me on the importance of a rifle machine, but the importance of the rifle machine being analog. Now, what has happened, what it looks like to me, but this isn't the question you've asked. We can kind of go into how it's kind of been hijacked and this and that and the other. But I think the importance between the analog and the digital is digital to me now seems like a psyop that is removing us away from the true roots of what we all are, which is the acoustic and the analog. And I think what happens when you've got this digital interface, it's very easy for them to come up with all these like databases and all these ideas that you are now some sort of diagnosis. But with the analog technology, it's very mechanical, it's very simple, and it's very beautiful because it's very simple. And also, through my research, it's based not on compartmentalized science, and there's no kind of kooky harvesting of data, and you don't have to put any data into it, right? So they say data is the new gold. Well, this actually is more of a living system for a living human being. So I suppose that's the simple way of putting it. It's a very simple, mechanical something made by human beings that are putting all of themselves into something to make something better. Whereas the digital stuff seems to be like some sort of rehashed something trying to emulate something that it just can't. Kind of like what you say about the AI, and all that stuff.
Yeah, so now you've dropped a couple of nuggets there that hopefully we won't get stuck in this cavern, because I do have some other questions I want to ask you about. But
Yeah.
The whole idea of analog is, to me, in my definition of it, it is the organic side of the frequency fields that we inhabit, whereas the
Yes.
digital side is a binary 1 and 0 representation of the organic. Does that make sense? Am I going
Yes.
anywhere there?
Yeah. Yes, it does. Yeah. Yeah. So when I was learning to make these buckets and these triangles, I needed some questions because I was like, well, this is what led me into actual physical analog devices. So I was like, well, what actually is this thing? So then I was like, okay, it's a Tesla bifilar coil. So then I'm like, okay, what is a Tesla bifilar coil? Somewhere in amongst that, I had a key question of what is magnetism. So then I went out into I'm great. Don't get me wrong. I'm grateful for the access to the digital world. But for me, it was like, okay, well, now I can go to YouTube and go, well, what is magnetism? And then there was a gentleman, very intelligent guy in Florida. He's a sea mistress, but he's very articulate with language, and he's read Plotinus and translated it. And often he says all this stuff, and I actually don't understand. Unfortunately, a lot of what he's saying just goes right over my head. So when he said he knew what magnetism was, I didn't really understand it. But fortunate for me, because if I'd stayed at that point, I might not have got back up. I might have thought, oh, I'm not intelligent enough, I'm not smart enough, and just walked away. But then I found a professor, also from the Imperial College of London, who was the late Professor Sir Eric Braithwaite. And back in the day, and you can find him on YouTube, and he was trying to invent a gyroscopic railway in Yorkshire, and he had an amazing laboratory. And this laboratory, he would do experiments. And the first thing he said when I watched his first video, and it was so inspiring, he was like, we actually don't know what magnetism is. And that answer to that question gave me enough, enough sort of like, yes, I can do this. He's a professor. If he doesn't know, fantastic. So then I went off on this journey, and it was like a light bulb, literally. And the technology I work with is like light bulbs. And I literally had this sort of idea just flashed into my mind of these like Victorian devices or something like that. It was like these tubes and this sort of steampunk idea. And I ended up finding this thing in the one day, and I was like, right, that's it. I don't want to make these buckets and triangles, but in amongst it, I was learning about Rodin coils and all these, and then I found something right back in time. So when I went back in time, then to the 1900s, I started to see that. Well, you're talking about, acupuncture and this and that and the other. When I'm now looking at the literature from that time, they're talking about magnetic therapy, magnetic electro homeopathy. So not only were they doing homeopathy, they were doing chiropractor, they were doing naturopathy. I think they called it the drugless sanitariums. They had the physician, who the physician alone was then equipped with the true roots of your Hippocrates, your Galen, all that phlegmatic. They had that humorous way of looking at the human being, didn't they? So they really were quite holistic in their thinking as well. So I think the whole time back then was more holistic. But when you look at the literature, they were really embodying the ether. So they were embodying the ether as the universal principle, but also, and this is in the literature. I'm not just saying this. I'm not just making it up. I haven't asked ChatGPT. I've got it in the physical literature, where they're talking about, literally, it's like they're talking about seen and unseen, and this kind of something of a mystery, but it's based on the ether. And then when you look at the way these things were created, and I kind of say, because science back then wasn't so compartmentalized and it wasn't really conflict of interest, and maybe there might have been some of it in there somewhere, but there might have been battles, right, between like your I think they called it force matter. So you might have had
it wasn't anywhere near institutionalized like it is now.
Yes,
You had pockets.
They were able to come together, isn't it? You go, oh, I'm H.G. Wells, and H.G. Wells might have come together with a few pints and battled Tolkien and C.S. Lewis in the pub.
Well, yeah, or Mark Twain and Nikola Tesla sitting down and having a beer.
Oh, yeah, they did, didn't they? Yeah,
right?
You'd see Mark Twain, didn't there? Yeah, I've got those photos, and there were some other remarkable people coming together with Tesla and that around that time. So so when you go back to that time, it looks like for example, if I look at a case from that time, it's like everything they were creating, they were embodying that wholeness into the work, and these things have lasted for 100 years. And and I've got some. I collect them, right? So because I'm so fascinated from where we've come from, it's definitely clear greatness. And I kind of think about it. I think, well, if Tesla was around today, if Bukowski was around today, if Reich was around today, I don't think they'd be making something digital. I think it would be very much. Well, I don't know, but I think it would be very much based on the evolution of those great things that they were building back then, which still work today. So God only knows what they would be creating.
Well, my perspective on this whole, because I've been in technology for almost 50 years now.
Yes.
50 years if I go back to my punch card days back in the early 70s when I was a UNIVAC 1701 key punch card technician. I used to go to places and fix those things.
Yes.
But in looking at the evolution of, to me, the technology evolution that we've seen has been basically to amplify human characteristics, capabilities, needs, etc. Because it's all been an information digitized ones and zeros construct.
Yes.
The stuff that Tesla, Whitehead, Maxwell, Heaviside, all these people were working with was the components of the ether, the atmosphere, which is the ether. Everything that we are in is formed from said ether, but everything that we need from energy, communication, water, is in the air that we breathe. And these guys were pursuing that. And to your point about them putting all of themselves into what they were working on, this sounds to me exactly like what the whole concept of magic and the alchemists and the people that practice the mystic arts in the mystery schools and so forth, what they were doing, the fundamental component to all magic, which is basically the intent to mutate or transmute or transform something from one state to another, is intention.
Yes.
Intention is
Yes.
the absolute fundamental component to anything working out well, whether you're playing in the mystic arts or if you're trying to build a Tesla coil.
Yes.
And I think that this is one of the things that is not understood nor appreciated for the importance of the intention. In fact, you remember the Secret, that documentary movie that came out back in the
Yes.
early
Yes.
2000s about the law of
Yes.
attraction?
Yes. Yes.
When I saw that, I went, okay, yes, this is true on its fundamental construct and the way they're presenting it. But what they're missing is the first law of attraction. And these aren't laws. This is just the fundamental habit, nature, characteristics of the way these things work. They aren't laws. They are just the way that they are. But before attraction is intention. You
Mm.
will attract what you intend.
Mm.
And people have missed that fundamental, and it's not magic, it's not really profound, it's just
No.
simply stating the way that things work. It's always intention.
Yeah.
Intention will
Yes.
guide your attention and vice
Yes.
versa. So you have attention and intention fueling one another. But that is then what drives this concept of attraction, setting a field of a frequency into the infinite field that is then resonating and harmonizing with what is out there that you are trying to attract, or trying to manifest, trying to bring to be. So I wanted to just amplify the point that you were making there about these people that were exploring all of these different ways in which the ether worked, the way it affected the human and the biological condition. The whole concept of magnetism you're exactly right. That there is no explanation for magnetism, just like there's no explanation for electricity. There is no agreed upon definition of what electricity is. We just
Yeah.
know that it's there. We know how to harness it and to manipulate it. And as I think it was Bob Proctor said in that movie, The Secret, you with electricity you can cook a man's meal, and you can cook the man.
Yeah, mate. Well, I've not heard Bob say that, but Bob was. I remember one day listening to Bob, and I remember the Rhonda Byrne secret thing in that, and I think it was Bob. You know, I think it was Bob and the great Reverend Beckwith that I took from that. You know, I was like, oh, you know, for me it
Yes.
was more like, who are these humans? I got to go and listen to a bit more of them. You know, but he was
Right.
amazing, like, because Bob would just shout at you, and I was like, freaking hell, man, this guy's like in his 80s, like, you know, and but you know, but I think the intention, like, the more I'm learning, like, as we all are, and like the intention, like you asked like, what is the difference between these modern digital devices that maybe you might get 10 years out of them, to a device that's lasted 100 years? And so, touch wood, we've still got this technology that we can see, and I'm like, oh my god, look at this marble top, or look at this mahogany top, or look at the gold writing, or the way they've embossed this horse with lightning sparks coming off, and putting in this violet coloured velvet with gold embossed writing, with like a symbol that looks like it's saying ether. And you know, look, they're blowing these tubes in house, and the women are winding on these copper coils, you know, and I think all of it was by design. You know, they were building, and the tubes as well. It was just pure air. And what's also amazing is the fact that back then, so yes, okay, so they might make a machine today, and everything about it seems like it's compartmentalized. Whereas the technology then, it might create ozone to sterilize, and electrons from the electricity, and then your photons and your plasma and all that stuff. And then they were multi. It's like they were holistic in their thinking. They weren't like, oh, we've got to do this for this money or for this thing. They were in this this electrical experimental wisdom, you know, of like, okay, That's how I
Well,
see it. Anyway, you know,
yeah,
that,
and I think that I think a lot of that, well, a lot of what happened, the freedom of being able to do that was uh, basically kind of given to us by Descartes with his Cartesian dualism, and as screwed up as that whole model has
yeah,
caused the sciences and the nonsense we're in now,
yeah.
it actually, in a sense, it
Well, that's the mind
liberated the
body, isn't it,
material.
Robert? That's the mind
What's that?
body, isn't it? That's the mind body thing, isn't it? Is that the mind and body? The mind body?
Well, yeah, it's basically the separation of the physical world from the ethereal world, from
Okay.
the
Yeah.
incorporeal, right? So what Descartes said was, because we figured out this thing called math, and we see math in everything we look in reality, the ergo
Yes.
we have discovered the mind of God.
Yeah.
Ergo, we are therefore the true arbiters of interface between humans and God here on the earth. So we will take all of this material world, and we are scientists, we are mathematicians, we are whatever, and we are going to go out and set forth and delineate all this reality through math. And then he said, all of that incorporeal, spirits, angels, demons, mind of God, mind of man, we'll leave that to the church. So that's really what the Descartesian dualism,
Uh,
Cartesian dualism, where it broke
yes.
the thinking. Now, prior to that,
Yes.
this is one of my rants I love going on, and I'll try to keep it short. Prior to Descartes, philosophy was where science was, right? Philosophy and
Yeah.
thought and
Yeah.
science were all
Yeah.
in this category called philosophy in the
Yes.
Western world.
Yes.
And also, up until that time, with literally every civilization that we've encountered, uh, decoded, and tried to analyze, they all have the same basic stories. Not only the fact that somebody up there came down here, showed us stuff, told us stuff, sold us stuff, and maybe even made us, but they also had another fundamental thing. And this is true with all civilizations, tribals to more developed civilizations and cultures. They thought that everything in the universe was alive. Everything had consciousness, not the same degree or the same level, depending on how you want to differentiate it, but the world was alive. The sun was alive. The earth was alive. The planets were alive. The galaxies were alive. Everything was a product of life. So all of the sciences, all of the philosophers, and everything up until, at least in the Western world, up until Descartes, that's how they saw everything. Well, Descartes shit on that, split it up,
Oh.
and that's
Oh.
how we ended up with basically the science that we have today. So that whole separation right there of taking out the concept that the universe, the reality we inhabit, is
Mm.
alive. It
Mm.
is all organic.
Mm.
Is what these guys that you're talking about, that we're exploring some of the different ways and these different thinkers were doing. They were integrative in their thinking, interdisciplinary in their approach, and they were using this, I believe, this concept that everything is alive and organic. Everything has frequency and fields and energy. Everything is in constant motion. Everything, if even quantum mechanics have finally gotten to the point to where, oh, there really isn't anything solid. It's all moving. It's all a wave. And you go, well, a wave isn't something. A wave is what something does. It's a motion, which requires both time and space to wave in. These guys, the Teslas, the Maxwells, the Heavisides, the Keeleys, the Whiteheads, I mean, all these guys, Walter Russell, Rife, all these people, they were not constrained by the constructs of the scientific, what I call a billiard ball model of crashing shit into each other. That's not how reality works. That's not how the materium actually is or functions. And these guys were all outside of that. They didn't limit themselves to this construct like you're talking about. They allowed themselves to mentally, intentionally explore with an open mind. And I think that what you've been doing, is a perfect modern example of that.
Oh, yes, thank you. Well, I kind of say a rising tide lifts all ships. And recently, I was listening to Joe McMoneagle, and he was talking about he's an elder, really, right? And he's some
Oh yeah.
human being from the Monroe Institute, and he was saying the importance of intention. And you know, you listen. Look, all I know is they've built these things. They've been built. They've been created. I agree with you. I think they were. I didn't know that about Descartes, and I kind of, you know, when I look at the food, and you know, someone then saying, "Oh, I need, you know, cannabis has CBD, or you know, something has this, or you need protein," and I'm like, who's put all these ideas even here?
Right?
Yeah, and
Yeah, who
who's
came up with that?
yeah, and
Yeah.
who's put it all up into these little boxes and everything? And I kind of imagine, like back then, you know, like going to somewhere like Windy City or Detroit. You know, there's this amazing film, and it was about this like bus driver, and in his dinner break he was writing poetry, and he was a great poet. And I just think I can just imagine those people back then going to the, you know, like you said, docking in, docking out. You know, the Roberts of that time, the Zishas of that time, going into the factory. Maybe they were reading some amazing literature in their dinner time. I think also there wasn't this new age, right? There was, you know, there was the great sort of, you know, there was that celebration of like what it was to be American, or what it was to be German, or you know, because when you look at the technology as well, like, so a lot of it was coming out of Detroit, a lot of it was coming out of Ohio, a lot of it was coming out of Chicago, and then it was coming over to they were then, so these are all based on the original 1910 patents of Tesla, because before that they had these like large H.G. Fisher diathermy machines, so they were too heavy. So then Tesla made these little like cases that people could use, and it became, you know, and then the Germans got hold of it. So the Germans were then like learning from your doctors in America, and it wasn't like, you know, conflict of interest. They were sharing the ideas. The Germans then were going crazy with what they were receiving from Detroit. They were writing like vast papers, like the amount of doctors' testimonials, chiropractic testimonials, drugless sanitarium testimonials. The knowledge that was just coming out of America alone was huge. And then the Germans were then just going, woohoo! And then they were writing volumes. I've seen machines that would have German flags and American flags on them. Then you could see like that Italy was running with it, the French and the French military were running with it, the British were running with it. Britain was then sharing licenses with the Belgium. Chicago was sharing licenses into Italy, into Switzerland, and there was this whole celebration of this, like this work that they were all doing. And when I hear about like how, you know, like maybe Paramahansa came over to California, and there'd be all these like, you know, lots of people coming and sitting down, or it could have been anyone, right? It could have been like Franz Barden, the magician, going into Germany, you know, and like everyone's sitting down because they want to learn the mysteries of like, you know, the afterlife and everything. And I think it was a lot more innocent. But I think when that war came in, when the wars came in, they started to, I think because they obviously knew about this idea that everything was a little bit more, maybe there was some sort of impulse of, you know, like this celebration of everything being living. But then there was that, so maybe this battle's been going on a lot as well, right? So maybe it's going right the way back. So we've got these battles from the past, and these sinkings of, you know, like the burnings of libraries in Alexandria, and you know, Atlantis, and all these sort of stories that we hear about, you know, and then you fast forward into the future, and then you hear about all these different projects that came out of Germany, that came to America, and all these different, you know, these different projects utilizing things to control. Whereas back then it was like, okay, let's look at the A to Z of the problems that we have right now, let's see what we can do with them, and they were just getting it done. So, and I think then if you could, this is what we see then, isn't it? They couldn't make money on it. There was no, you know, there was that whole, I want to control the power, I want to control, turn all the, you know, tax everything, tax everybody. And it could have gone a much better way than what it has gone. And for me, having the technology from then, it just opens up the ideas. It's just it's wonderful. There's just so much good that can come from this, and also then to tackle. So today, then, and it's not just the analog, right? The acoustic's important too, which then comes back to your everything being living and grounding onto the earth. And I do think the machines are like chi machines as well, because that's been validated by the qigong masters. But then, if we're now dealing with something that is based on these ones and zeros, and they're making this ones and zeros like atmosphere, and this ones and zeros ether, and this ones and zeros digital world, which is only ones and zeros, and everybody's in a state of fear. Oh, I'm really afraid of the quantum AI. Oh, I'm really afraid of all this stuff. But but we've learned to adapt, and and we're still here, and we keep pushing back. I think connecting to that truth that we come from. My friend Mark says we're in a post-truth world. So anything that we can identify with the simple truths, and I kind of say it, I say, well, it's kind of a bit of a dichotomy, isn't it? Because we're in this so-called smart world, and we're supposed to be getting smarter, and yet the Silicon Valley, owners don't want their children on the tablets. Yet you then see the Swiss people coming out of, the people that can't pronounce their P's and Q's and talk about resilience and a fragmented world. They start talking about like all the children like being in schools with tablets, and you're like, so it seems this fourth industrial revolution, and I'm like, well, what kind of industrial revolution do you want? And I certainly would like to see some kind of evolution. And so in amongst the analog, we do play then with the acoustic as well. So you, like in America, Tennessee, you had the amazing, he's passed away in 2008, but human beings like Slim Sperling. He wasn't New Age, and he was into this radiesthia or something, like playing with cleaning up geopathic stress and cleaning up all these different generational technology and finding the water and dowsing and working. I think Hans Becker proved the science of how important it was to use lost qubit, sacred qubit, and playing with it. And so with these digital machines, they're kind of saying, oh, they're reducing you to a diagnosis. Oh, you're a Lyme's disease. The Lyme's disease, you've got to put it into your fake Rife machine, and it's a 220 hertz, and then you're there like trying to you've got no time really anyway, because you're consumed with all rising taxes and everything, and you're then trying to put in this whole data bank of all these diagnoses that you think you are. Whereas the original technology is like made, and it doesn't judge you, because rather than it being a set wave or one wave, it's the technology, everything I've looked at, it's multiple waves. And so you're not reduced to a diagnosis. You're not just one wave. If we don't even know what water is, if we don't even know what magnetism is, electricity, oil, like how on earth do we really know what we are? So at least though, if you were to go to your grandparents and say, hey granddad, granddad, I'm thinking about working with this electrotherapeutic device from 1919. He'd look at it and go, oh yeah, son, I remember that. My doctor had that. They're amazing, Or I remember Aunt Susie going and using that, and it helped her. It helped her eyes. He'd recognise it. But a lot of this, so when we're so-called smart, I kind of now say, let's keep it simple, stupid. And if you can't explain it to your granddad, you can't explain it to a kid. Like, all these new smart things like your methylene blues and your ivermectins and all these sorts of things. I'm like, imagine going back to your great-great-grandmother saying, grandmother, I think I have parasites and I need ivermectin and diatomaceous earth. They'd like slap you around the head and go, lie down there and let's get some turpentine on you and calm the Frank down. You're being
take a shot of this cod liver oil and walk it off.
Yeah. Well, here have some rose hips. Have some rose hip, and or have the Welsh would actually, like for flu, they'd give people like elderflower wine with because it's an abundance here, with like rose with a mustard and goose fat. That's how they treat flu, is amazing. And then you see people like Wim Hof, just on a glacial, breathing doing all his breathing and stuff, whether it works or not, he's proven that, okay, inject me with a deadly virus if they exist. And he's there going, well, that didn't do anything. A bit like the stories of Ram Dass being given LSD, his guru being given LSD and going, and what, And so you're giving that to him. He's showing you it hasn't done anything. Then he's showing his whole team of other human beings around him going, well, that didn't do anything. And it just shows you alone, isn't it, the power of the breath. Like, just something as simple as what do we really know about that? And only now, I think there's a guy called James Nestor, is now like, it's like we do have to reinvent or reimagine the greatness, because we started off this conversation with like, homeopathy and traditional Chinese medicine, traditional Afghan medicine and the knowledge of the gypsies. And we have to go back so that we win this battle in the future, because I think we've won it, but it's like that knowledge from then needs to be rekindled. And I think that's, like I said to you, I want to be on the land with cows, but I seem to be in this position where I'm going, hey, look at this technology. And you want the modern stuff to be good. Of course you do. If someone comes to me and says, hey, Zeus, check out this QZLA, and I'm like, yeah, I want it to be great, but I look at it, you look at it then with the lens of, because you've seen something that's an antique and it still works 100 years later. And then you look at something and you go, what is this shit? Like, you can appreciate it from a guitar. You can see guitars, and they've never really changed them, have they? They've never really changed. Maybe they've gone from, metal strings to now maybe a nylon, right? But other than that, they've
there's all kinds of evolution in that. But the point that I want to make about what you just said.
Yes.
I look at the delineation between analog and digital as being one is organic and one is inorganic.
Yes.
Now, the importance, again, because of my geezer geekness, rubbing my face in tech for decades, the power of the tech to automate, enhance human capabilities and needs for information, for aggregation of information, for analyzing information. There's nothing, you can't do that. What's available today you can't do with a book or a library, okay? You can do it with a much slower pace and a lot more angst, but I was just talking to Karen this weekend. We did a show Saturday night, and she was talking about how we were actually discussing the rate of improvement of being able to get medical diagnosis from the available information using an AI agent and aggregate and give that information. It's never been this powerful. It's never been this accessible. Now, the thing about using technology or the digital side of the frequency spectrum, which to me is what analog is all about, the reason it works is because it's a part of, involved in, and requires the organic energy fields, the infinite field of frequencies that we inhabit. So that's why it works so well and so easily. It's basically sophisticated simplification. Sophisticated in the sense that you're actually understanding and reaching out through an interdisciplinary approach to the available information, but it's still rooted in the foundation of the organic nature of reality. On the digital side, you can model, you can map, you can monitor the frequencies, and you can give representations of them. You can show interrelationships between them, which is pattern recognition, which is what all these expert systems actually are and do exceptionally well. But to be able to get the same frequency from an analog device and a digital device, you may have, it's 432 hertz, and you got them both dialed in. To me, the purest form of that is going to be in the analog side. The digital side is going to give you some reasonable facsimile. It may actually have some kind of impact because it is designed to emit, to focus on and emit that frequency. But I don't know. I can't see how an inorganic uh, generation of a frequency is going to be anywhere near as good as the analog generation of that frequency. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does. Yes, I can hear an interference. Can you hear that there?
No,
Mm.
I don't hear anything but you.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yes, it does. It all makes sense. Yeah. I just for me it's just really simple. It's just it works, right? So I don't know. I don't know. I just know that it. I just yeah. We're not all that. We're not all these like silly, like you know. e- Like even when someone's come up with where a specific hurts and this and that and the other, I'm like, well, hey, oh, there's Robert. There's a funny sound coming off. I can't quite concentrate. There's a funny. There's a funny crackling coming off my phone.
I hear a sound in your background.
Yeah, there really isn't. Like, well, yeah, my son will be in the other room because my battery was literally on 5%. It kind of like sucked it all up,
You
as you say. But I've literally just plugged my phone in now, and it's kind of like it's kind of going like like that.
well, maybe this is a good time. We've just hit an hour, actually. How about
Yeah,
that?
yeah. I've literally come in, and my phone's yeah, yeah. No, that's good. Anyway, that's good. Well, what we can do a part two.
Yes.
I've had a whole day of like brain stuff today, so my brain's just a little bit sort of like with like all my with my day everything
Yeah,
got moved.
and you got crazy shit coming out of this old geezer geek throwing at you, and you're going, well, I think I understood what he said.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Actually, the last thing that you said, I didn't. I actually because I was like, oh shit, I'm on 5%. I think if I'm honest, the meat and potatoes was you were saying something about you and Karen and how the AI was getting more, sophisticated, and then everything else I was trying to. I don't think I really got it. I might have done, but maybe we can catch up on that question and start again next time.
Yeah, the
My,
I
my
went
phone's li-
into and
my phone's
I
literally.
went into the whole idea of the difference between analog and digital healing, and what I think the
Oh,
difference is being one being organic, one being inorganic, and the organic is always going to win because it's based on the actual frequency set. It's connected to the organic world, whereas the digital is an inorganic system that can only replicate or mimic, but it can still have some positive, maybe minimal or some
yeah.
varying degree of success
Yes.
and impact, but it's
Yes.
never going to be have the same impact and influence that an organic model will.
Okay, okay, right, okay. Well, this is actually really important what you're actually saying because now we have to ask ourselves, well, why did like Rife, unfortunately, fall on the bar of soap in San Diego? Why did this happen to Tesla? Why did it happen? And then suddenly it's all back in the mainstream, but brought under the umbrella of, someone from China, and it's actually called Spooky, and it's got, back doors into China, and, you're like, you make of that what you want, and yeah, okay, sure, they're going to bring all these digital devices and they're going to do something on the human biology to a degree. But if people
Mm-hmm.
are not factoring in today these ideas of like Tesla phoresis and what they're doing in the laboratories, all your different laboratories around the world, and they're playing now. A lot of money is going into the Internet of Everything, but most importantly, the Internet of Nano Things. So that a lot of money is going into this compartmentalized science, specifically that internet, the digital. Then the question is, and then if you then put in because me and you can talk about it like this, the interoperability of everything, being us, the interoperability of everything, the
Mm-hmm.
interoperability of humans, maybe where the batteries, we don't really know what we are, but then you could go right into the future and look at all these like spooky films of like, Terminator and The Matrix and Star Trek and all these things. But Star Trek's actually is quite an interesting one because, well, yeah, sure, like you can hit the Borg once, twice, three times, but what if then with these, because they know that there's always going to be a resistance, right? They might have known that during the 60s there was going to be a resistance, but hey ho, look what was put there. Maybe there was some drugs put there, and maybe they put the Grateful Dead there and put all these things. And then the 90s came and hip hop came, and maybe that was freeing the Africans, but then they brought in, like they weaponized that. And more recently we had our green movement, and then they weaponized that. In the 90s they had the little rave movement, and hey ho, look, came in ecstasy and all these drugs. What would it have been like if they hadn't have put these little caveats in place to psyop the masses into this something? And so today I kind of say, okay, well, if we've been having these challenges since the 20s and the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, 80s, 90s, what would be the psyop today? So I lived through the 90s, and I can certainly say that yes, there was an aspect of Summer of Love, but it was certainly infiltrated with the with the drugs and all that kind of stuff. And but at least we still had the analog music. We had the decks, 2 turntables, so we had the electromagnetic. We had the speakers, and and we had all of.
Yep.
But the digital, to me, seems like it is the ultimate psyop. So then. And then if you combine that then with the New Age, like the gods of the New Age, which probably started around, when the Beatles were going off to India, and they were bringing back all these Hindu cults into the West, and and then today, how is that digital, especially if they've been geoengineering, they say they've been geoengineering since the 50s. How does that all combine with them then bringing out the rifle machine, and now you're allowed to use the rifle machine? But now, don't get me wrong, you can get pure analog rifle machines. So the answer here is not all rifle machines are created equal. You could actually, Aaron Murakami and Eric Dollard, they do this one called the RPX, which is based on Bedini's original motor, and it's a true rifle machine that sweeps through. So I think as long as the human being knows that, okay, well, let's maybe, okay, I want a rifle machine, but why don't I, rather than stopping at the first person telling you how great a spooky is because of what it did for their ailment, my question is were they ever that ailment anyway? It's quite interesting, isn't it? We're reducing ourselves to thinking that we're a diagnosis, when we've actually surrendered ourselves over to somebody who's compartmentalized, who's decided that we're a diagnosis, and then so you're like, okay.
Well, and that's the thing to me that's really important is, yes, we are the diagnosis. I mean, the whole idea of diagnosing your own ailments and your own condition is it's not only not taught, it is pushed aside, and you get the finger waving at you when you try to take any responsibility and accountability for your own wellness, for your own. It's like, oh, you better go see a doctor about that. Or the latest pharmaceutical ad that has combined 15 symptoms that in any one of them, any 1,000 people could have. And now all of a sudden you've got 15,000 new patients because they went, oh, shit, I've got a half a dozen of those symptoms. I better go get that new drug. The symptoms have been diagnosed incorrectly because all of the science, from physics to health, even in academia and our learning approach to education and knowledge, all of it is broken.
Yes.
All of it is broken because every one of them have been looking in the wrong place for the wrong thing for the wrong reasons.
Yes.
Because they've been in this siloed, compartmentalized knowledge domain that has been lorded over by those who, for whatever reason, were granted authority and some level of importance over said domain of knowledge, whatever the fuck it is. And this is amplified, and a perfect example in all theologies. All religions have this same kind of model of there's some entity, some personality at the head of it that has dictated the conduct and how everyone is to comport with said dictates of whatever that personality had. So you have that in the Western religions. The Abrahamic religions, they've all got their individually, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity have got their own dude, but they all reported back to Abraham. So they're basically, it's like, how many stacks of personalities have you people introduced into your complex system of trying to navigate and be successful in your iteration, your carbon meat suit that you've come and inhabited, a la you have Ubered your meat suit in this iteration. Which one of the many different ways in which people have defined reality are you going to sign up for? Are you going to go with the West with their belief systems? You're going to go do some Asian stuff? What about those Indies out there? And don't forget the Buddhists and the Taoists. Now, the Taoists, I are one. I've been for 30 years. And when I was looking for something that helped me describe and give at least some description, if not an explanation to my experience, it wasn't until I ran into Taoism, where there is no hierarchy. There is no anything other than you being in the universe and you existing and experiencing in a fluid way with the universe. And that's why Taoism I went, all right, this sounds good. I can work with this because it matches my experience. But all of these things, I think technology, oddly enough, and I agree with a lot of the things that you've said about the problems with, maybe is this digital world a psyop, right? Oddly enough, it is a tool that has been used for both good and bad. But the power of the tool, I think, in my opinion, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that's come out in the last few weeks along this line of thinking, I think that technology is actually going to save us. It's going to save us two ways. One, it's liberating the access to knowledge, and the aggregation of knowledge now is beyond anything anybody could imagine, except if you're a Star Trek fan. So that aggregation and the access to the ubiquitous nature of information is going to liberate a shitload of people. And in that process, a lot of people are going to lose their shit because they're not going to believe what they were told and sold was bullshit, because they've now done their own research, i.e. their own diagnosis of their own consciousness, their own mental state, and they have found that what they were told and sold, they have found it wanting. So now they're off exploring. So there's this rich field of information. The second thing is that I think it's going to actually cause as a offshoot of the first one, a great deal of reflection. And if there's one thing that people don't do enough of, is sit back and think about why they think what they think about. Why do I feel what I feel about? Am I reacting as opposed to responding? What is it about me that constitutes me, and then therefore gives some kind of direction to the navigation of reality I inhabit? What is that? And that has been covered over, smothered over, obfuscated, and tossed to the side for decades in the social discourse and in the academic institutions. There's been a clampdown of the mind. There's been a clampdown of reality. There's been a boxing and a siloed construct put in place for all of the different things that have happened as a result of technology. And it's not that the physics or billiard ball gritology physics isn't incorrect. It is incorrect. But it's based on the real technology, the analog natural construct of the frequency fields that we inhabit. So I think that there's going to be a lot of exploration of the knowledge that's available. There's going to be a lot of self-reflection, because people are going to have to answer questions to themselves. This whole wide view and field of knowledge is nothing more than the biggest question generator of all time. And if you're not asking questions, if you're not questioning that which you are experiencing, and trying to really understand what it is, are you experiencing something that somebody told you? That's what's happening when you have that feeling. That's what happens when you have that experience. Is it really that? I don't know how many times I've had an experience where I had adopted what somebody else told me those experiences were. And I had a Christian music ministry back in the early '80s. I was beating people over the head with the Bible, telling them if they don't do this,
You're frozen.
adios for you and a good time afterlife, right?
Oh yeah, you
So,
froze. You,
uh,
I think you've frozen. I think you've frozen. You're frozen a bit. You've
am
frozen.
I still there? Am I
Yeah,
still there?
you're still here.
Okay.
Yes, you're still here.
Well,
Sorry,
I
you
was getting on a
froze. You
rant and
froze a
starting to
bit.
really run on that one. Maybe let's go ahead and call this part two, and or part one, and we will go do a part two.
Yeah, we can do a part two. Yeah, there's look, we haven't. We're really on the tip of the iceberg. I think. I'd like to just say as well. We seem to be back now. I think. Right, don't get me wrong. I think the technology is good. I just think it's the way that it's being is certain. If AI is 25% hallucinating, because I'm very much into technology, as you know, so I'm down with technology. But I'm down with the great in technology. I'm down with during the Trump part. I was like, well, okay, my country doesn't really like him. Look at the way the news is portraying him. It got me shadow banned on the Instagrams and stuff, and I was like, well, all I'm doing is listening to this human being, and he seems like love him or hate him. It seems to me that what he's saying, there's a lot of common sense which seems to be lacking today. And I was like, I don't know much about this guy, but I'm listening to him. He sounds pretty, I don't, to me and my family, we were like, he sounds all right. I didn't see what the problem is, and so. From there, because he was being like, let's make America great again, I didn't quite understand what was wrong with wanting to make a country great again, and so I ran with that because I like Clint Eastwood as a director and as an actor, and I was like, well, actually, and some of his most recent films were amazing, and he's still trucking on, and I was like, well, you got the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's add great into that, because I can find the good in things. I can find the great in things, no, the ugly in things, the bad in things, but I want the great in things, right? And over since that whole Trump first time in, I've been like, okay, every year I'm like, what should I carry through this year? And I'm like, it's been the great ideas. And so for me, this is a time of great ideas and coming together. Like, folks might not know this, but I met you through being in, it could be a psyop, but people, if I say it, people will understand. You got your red pills, all your different coloured pills. I happen to be in what I now regard as a black pill community, but was one. It was so wrapped up in its own story of its own demise that it was what the problem they see. They've become so entangled within it that they've forgotten the root. Okay, well, once maybe you thought you were a diagnosis, and interesting what you said, that yes, you are your own diagnosis. So I think that's quite good, actually. Yeah, okay, I can check my pulse and do all these things myself. Self-diagnosis, I think, is a great idea. And what I've noticed is so many people are going out there to, I've got to go to here, I've got to go and see this vet, I've got to go, which I've gone to the vet, right? But I got to the point where the vet empowered me to, and I wish that I could have given back to him what he'd given to me, because within his compartmentalized, he was such a great vet to others, but forgot then to implement that on himself. And then it was quite sad how he actually died. I think he might have been targeted, but that's another story, because he was a great human being. And so with that, and then with these different groups that get entangled with, well, what they thought they were, then they broke out of it. And I think it's good if we can break out of whatever's, Bob Proctor actually said it quite nicely. He said, one thing he said was, Madame Montessori said, children have everything they need, they have within them. Let's just water that seed and allow it to flourish. But he also said, for us, grown-ups, in these grown-up shells, he said, these grown-up suits, he said, break free of the me that everyone else wants you to be. And so for me, also, rather than the digital technology reducing you to the idea of some kind of diagnosis, be it for your own self-diagnosis or what somebody else said to you that you were, which is often that savior mindset of giving your energy to someone else, the analog and the acoustic, so think your qigong, think the human resonance, think your tuning forks, you know, even beautiful essential oils that meet you with where you're to, because they're all part of that living system that we're all a part of. You know, why separate ourselves from that, all of everything, the creation? That's why I kind of bring it quite as a triad of the food, the medicine, and the technology. And then also it's the human. There's that the great in the human, right? The great ideas that have forged and galvanized for us to be here today to have these conversations. And often me and you will be like, well, okay, we've got this Cartesian thing going on here, but let's not forget that we're at this place where, you know, Plotinus and Plato were coming together, having these conversations. We're able to, rather than being in this compartmentalized world where we have this intelligentsia that's deciding for us what is truth. And one minute I'm in a post-truth world, and now the AI is hallucinating. Thank God for people like Mike Adams bringing out something called Enoch. And so I think then the pushback when you have these control grids wanting to utilize technology, you know, you could look at it from the CBDC, isn't it? Okay, we want to have this controlling CBDC where the BIS decides what food you're going to eat and how much you can have because of your carbon credits and cow patty farts and stuff like that, you know. And it's like, well, on the other hand, then there's the true roots of the decentralization and the owning of our data and the owning of our identity and the owning of, you know, okay, you shall have nothing and be happy. No, thank you very much. That's, if you want that, you can have that for yourself. But I might want to have lots of little guitars and Tesla machines because I like to have things. And because you want me to have nothing and be happy, well, who's to say I can't have guitars and Tesla machines and be happy too? You know.
Well, the thing is, those that are trying to define what the boundaries and the guardrails of happiness are some of the most miserable fuckers on the planet. They shouldn't be anywhere around having any input to what is happiness.
Look at that, like that Gates guy, right, with a less than favourable name of a company and not the most desirable looking human being to give health advice. I'm about 50 odd, and I think I could give you some advice that, you know, I think I'm doing quite well for my age. But if I look at someone like Mr. Gates, I'm looking at him thinking, why would I take anything that you've got to offer? So I think that, you know, being who you are and thinking, okay, well, I'm doing some things that actually do work. Well, maybe they might work for you. And I think if we can lift people up, what I've realised, I think also with a lot of this digital stuff and all of it, I think you might get like a honeymoon effect. So you might even get someone saying, well, diatomaceous earth worked. What were you doing before you brought the diatomaceous earth in? What were you doing before you brought this methylene blue in? What was your lifestyle like before then? And maybe that's why it's working. Maybe within that, you know, like for example, they'll say, oh, this EE system works. I mean, you've just paid 250,000 for what? When I look at it, I'm like, that looks shit. You know, this EE system, you just paid 250,000 for it. But what if it was the little salt packet that cost you $30 that came with your EE system that is actually working?
Unfortunately, there are nefarious people that will take advantage of anything that's good and turn it to shit.
Yeah.
Or, you know, give it a maligned name or perspective. But why don't we pick that up in part 2?
Yeah.
Why don't we?
Yeah.
Because there, as you said, we're just scratching the surface here. And I know we're going to wet some whistles on what did you guys talk about? Let's hear some more of that.
Yeah, for sure. We should, yeah, well, I'm just a dad, right? That knows some things together, and we're all in this stuff together. And if it opens up questions and that in the comments, where we can then, like, you know, maybe do another one based on some of the questions. Like, what were you guys talking about at that bit? And we can then revisit that and talk about that bit and see where it goes. But
absolutely.